We're a wealthy family and you showed up to your own engagement party in a cheap dress. My future mother-in-law sneered. My future sister-in-law stepped forward, ripped my dress apart and spat. She's trying to humiliate our family. My fiancé just lowered his head and said nothing. But when my powerful grandfather walked into the ballroom, if you love stories where arrogant and toxic people get the instant karma they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a satisfying ending. My name is Heidi. I lost my parents in a tragic accident when I was 9 years old. Since that day, my grandfather Harold raised me. He is a highly powerful and immensely wealthy figure in the corporate world. He built a massive business empire and planned for me to inherit everything. But 3 years ago, I made a decision that surprised him. I refused to step into a life of privilege without understanding how the real world operates. I wanted to move to Sacramento to rent a cheap apartment and work an ordinary job. I needed to learn the true value of hard work and money before taking over his legacy. I promised him I would not use our family name or wealth to solve any problems. My grandfather respected my independence. He agreed to my unusual request and completely hid my true identity. I left my luxurious life behind and became an ordinary working girl. I truly believed living a humble life would shield me from superficial and greedy people. I never expected that my choice would lead me straight into the most humiliating night of my life. My independent life in Sacramento began with a cramped studio apartment and a job as a hotel receptionist. I drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a rattling engine and worked grueling rotating shifts at a bustling downtown hotel. For the first time in my life, I had to budget for groceries, calculate rent, and count my tips to pay for gas. It was physically exhausting, but it felt incredibly liberating. I loved the complete anonymity. Nobody looked at me and saw a billionaire's granddaughter. They just saw a hard-working girl trying to make ends meet. That was exactly how I met my fiancé Sullivan. He was a software engineer attending a massive corporate tech mixer hosted in our hotel's main banquet hall. While other guests were loud, demanding, and entitled, Sullivan completely stood out. He was polite, soft-spoken, and possessed a remarkably gentle demeanor. During a particularly chaotic evening, a frustrated VIP guest yelled at me over a booking error. Sullivan quietly stepped in, handed me a cup of coffee, and offered a reassuring smile until the angry man walked away. We started talking during my break, and he asked for my number before the night ended. Our relationship blossomed quickly. Sullivan was the exact opposite of the cutthroat, arrogant men I grew up around in my grandfather's elite corporate circles. He never bragged about his salary. He listened intently when I spoke, remembered my favorite takeout orders, and always made sure I got home safely after my late-night shifts. I genuinely believed I had found a safe harbor, a man who valued character over bank accounts. But looking back, the warning signs were always there. I simply chose to ignore them. Sullivan was the textbook definition of a mama's boy. His mother dictated his schedule, his daily choices, and his overall mood. It started with small, persistent interruptions. We would be in the middle of a romantic anniversary dinner, and his phone would loudly buzz. The screen would flash his mother's name. Instead of silencing the device, Sullivan would instantly drop his fork, apologize frantically, and take the call. He would spend 20 minutes pacing outside the restaurant, nodding eagerly to whatever demands she was making, leaving me sitting alone at the table. One evening, as we sat in my tiny living room, I finally voiced my growing concerns. I watched him text his mother back for the 5th time in a single hour. "Sullivan," I said, putting my coffee cup down on the table, "you talk to your mom constantly. Does she actually know about me? What if she doesn't like the fact that I'm just a hotel receptionist living paycheck to paycheck?" He did not look up from his screen immediately. When he finally did, he offered a dismissive, nervous laugh. He reached out and squeezed my hand. "My mom will understand, don't worry," he replied smoothly. "She just worries about me. Once she gets to know you, she will see how amazing you are. Just let me handle her." He always said that. Let me handle her. He actively avoided any deep conversations about his family dynamics. He hated conflict and would do absolutely anything to keep the peace, especially if it meant keeping his mother happy. At the time, I mistook his extreme conflict avoidance for a peaceful nature. I thought his blind obedience to his mother just meant he was a loyal family man. I had no idea that his inability to stand up for himself would eventually shatter our relationship. Despite those subtle red flags, my love for him grew stronger. He made me feel grounded in a reality I desperately craved. A year later, Sullivan proposed. He did not plan an extravagant flash mob or rent out a luxury yacht. Instead, he took me to a quiet park overlooking the Sacramento River at sunset. We walked along the water talking about our future plans. Suddenly he stopped walking, took a deep breath, and dropped to one knee on the grass. He pulled out a small velvet box containing a modest diamond ring. His hand shook slightly as he looked up at me. He promised to protect me, to build a simple and happy life together, and to always stand by my side. Tears filled my eyes. It was exactly the kind of genuine, unpretentious moment I had always wanted. I did not care that the ring cost a fraction of what my grandfather spent on a single business lunch. I cared about the man holding it. I said yes, throwing my arms around his neck. I held onto him tightly, firmly, believing that my secret identity did not matter and that our love could withstand any storm. 1 week after accepting his proposal, Sullivan took me to his family's home to officially introduce me to his mother and sister. We pulled into the driveway of a large suburban house. The property featured flashy landscaping and oversized columns that felt desperate for attention. Sullivan unlocked the front door and led me into a living room aggressively decorated with gold accents and faux crystal chandeliers. There, I met my future mother-in-law Rita and my future sister-in-law Sabrina. Rita wore a stiff designer dress and a heavy pearl necklace for a simple family dinner. She offered a tight, practiced smile. Sabrina stood next to her holding a crystal wine glass. The very first thing Sabrina did was look me up and down. Her eyes darted straight to my handbag. When she realized it lacked a recognizable luxury logo, her upper lip curled into a brief sneer. "So Heidi," Sabrina drawled, swirling her wine. "I saw you pull up. Is that your car parked behind my Mercedes?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "It is an older Honda Civic." "Oh," Sabrina said. She stretched the syllable out, loading it with pity. "Well, it gets you from point A to point B, I suppose. I just could never deal with the maintenance on those vintage vehicles." Sullivan chuckled nervously and guided me toward the dining room. Rita had prepared an elaborate spread complete with polished silver cutlery and folded cloth napkins. For the first 20 minutes of the meal, Rita played the role of a gracious high society hostess. She bragged extensively about her country club memberships, her charity galas, and Sabrina's supposedly thriving media company. I sat quietly eating my food and offering polite nods. Then Rita turned her sharp gaze entirely on me. "Sullivan mentioned you work downtown, Heidi," Rita said, folding her hands on the table. "Which corporate firm are you with? Are you in finance marketing?" I put my fork down and met her eyes. "I actually work as a hotel receptionist." The clinking of silverware abruptly stopped. Sabrina froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. The warm, inviting atmosphere vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating chill. Rita stared at me as if I had just announced a contagious disease. Her practiced, welcoming smile completely dissolved. "A receptionist," Rita repeated flatly. The word felt like poison in her mouth. "Yes," I said. "I handle guest relations and front desk operations." Rita leaned back in her chair and let out a heavy theatrical sigh. She looked at Sullivan, then back at me, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "My son is a senior software engineer," Rita stated, her voice dropping into a cold, mocking tone. "He has a very promising career and an elite social circle. He needs a wife of the same caliber to support his growth. Someone who understands the demands of his lifestyle." She paused, letting the silence stretch to ensure her next words hit as hard as possible. I have nothing against honest labor, Heidi, but a hotel receptionist is, well, the gap is just a bit too far. How do you expect to stand beside him at industry events? What will his colleagues think? My heart pounded against my ribs. The sheer disrespect was staggering. I turned my head to look at Sullivan. This was his house. This was his mother insulting the woman he had just asked to marry him. I waited for him to speak up. I waited for him to defend my honor, to tell his mother that my job did not define my worth, or to at least ask her to show some basic manners. Sullivan did absolutely nothing. He stared down at his plate. A deep flush crept up his neck. Instead of confronting Rita, he let out a weak, awkward laugh. "So, Sabrina," Sullivan stammered frantically, changing the subject. "How is the new marketing campaign going for your company?" Sabrina smirked at me before turning to answer her brother. Just like that, I was dismissed. The conversation shifted entirely to Sabrina's business ventures. I sat there in stunned silence. The man who promised to protect me just a week ago could not even find the courage to defend me against a rude comment at a dinner table. The rest of the evening dragged on in agonizing tension. I finished my meal mechanically, realizing exactly how little my dignity mattered in this household. The discomfort from that dinner quickly escalated when Rita arranged a private meeting with me a few days later. She chose an upscale coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, she was already seated, sipping an espresso with a thick manila folder resting on the table. She did not bother with pleasantries. The moment I sat down, she slid the folder across the marble surface. "Read it," Rita instructed flatly. I opened the folder. It was a prenuptial agreement drafted by her lawyers. I scanned the pages, and the legal jargon was incredibly cold and calculated. It outlined a complete separation of assets. If a divorce occurred, I would waive all rights to alimony or spousal support. I would be solely responsible for my own debts, and I would have absolutely no claim to any wealth Sullivan acquired during our marriage. It was an ironclad document deliberately designed to ensure I walked away with absolutely nothing. I felt a sharp sting of insult, but I kept my composure. I closed the folder and pushed it slightly away. "This is very thorough." "It protects my son," Rita replied, leaning forward with a hard stare. "But that document only covers the legalities. If you truly want to marry into our family, there is an unwritten condition you must accept." I looked at her, waiting. "You will resign from that cheap receptionist job immediately," Rita demanded. Her tone left no room for negotiation. "Having my daughter-in-law work a minimum wage service job is a total embarrassment to our social standing. You will stay at home, manage the household, and focus entirely on supporting Sullivan's career. You will not embarrass us by carrying luggage or answering phones for strangers." The sheer audacity of her demand left me completely speechless. She wanted me to surrender my financial rights in writing and give up my only source of independent income in reality. She was actively trying to trap me in a corner where I would be entirely dependent on her family's mercy. I placed my hand firmly on the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I am not signing this," I said clearly. "And I am certainly not quitting my job." Rita's eyes narrowed into sharp slits. "Excuse me. Marriage is an equal partnership, not a corporate acquisition," I stated, holding my ground. "I do not want your son's money. I can support myself. But I refuse to sign a contract that treats me like a financial liability, and I will not give up my independence just to protect your fragile social image. If Sullivan wants to marry me, he marries all of me, including my career." Rita slammed her coffee cup down. "You arrogant little girl, you are just upset because you cannot secure our wealth. We will see what Sullivan has to say about your stubbornness." She grabbed her purse and stormed out. That evening, I waited for Sullivan in my apartment. The moment he walked through the door, I confronted him. I demanded to know why he allowed his mother to ambush me with an aggressively unfair contract and an ultimatum to ruin my career. Instead of validating my anger or defending me, Sullivan let out a long, exhausted sigh. He rubbed his temples, dropped his briefcase, and collapsed onto the couch. "Heidi, please," Sullivan groaned. "Why do you have to make everything so incredibly difficult?" I froze in my tracks. I am making things difficult. She asked me to waive all my rights and quit my job. She treated me like a criminal trying to rob you. "It is just a piece of paper," Sullivan argued, refusing to meet my furious gaze. "My mom worries. That is just how she operates. And honestly, she has a point about the job. You work crazy hours for terrible pay. I make enough for both of us. Just quit the hotel, sign the document, and let her have this win. It is not a big deal. Let her have this win," I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Sullivan, she is treating me like a gold digger. She is trying to strip away my independence so I have nowhere to go. She is just trying to protect the family," Sullivan snapped, raising his voice loudly. He immediately caught himself and lowered his head, pacing the floor. "Look, just sign it, okay? Other women would be thrilled to stay home. Just please her to keep the peace. I don't want to deal with the fighting anymore." He walked into the bedroom and shut the door behind him. I stood alone in the living room, staring at the closed door in total silence. He did not care about my dignity, my career, or my feelings. He only cared about avoiding conflict with his mother. At that exact moment, a massive crack formed in the foundation of our relationship, and the damage felt entirely irreversible. Since I absolutely refused to sign the agreement, Rita shifted her tactics to controlling my entire public image for the engagement party. 3 days before the event, a massive delivery box arrived at my apartment. The packaging bore the logo of an ultra-luxury boutique from the wealthiest district in the city. I opened the lid and pulled back the tissue paper. Inside lay a dress that represented everything I despised about superficial wealth. It was heavily covered in cheap-looking rhinestones, featured an uncomfortably revealing neckline, and came in a blindingly loud color. It looked less like an engagement outfit and more like a desperate cry for attention. Before I could even put the lid back on the box, my phone rang. Rita's name flashed on the screen. "I assume the courier dropped off my package," Rita stated the second I answered the call. She did not bother saying hello. "I received a box, yes," I replied, staring down at the gaudy fabric. "But I am not wearing this." Rita let out a sharp, condescending laugh through the receiver. "You do not have a choice in this matter. From now on, you are a part of the Vance family. I will decide what you wear. You need to look the part so you do not embarrass us in front of our high society guests. Put it on, get it tailored if you must, and wear it on Saturday." "I am perfectly capable of dressing myself," I said firmly, keeping my voice level. "I already have an outfit prepared for my engagement party. I do not care what cheap rags you bought from a discount rack," Rita snapped, dropping her polite facade completely. "You will wear what I bought you, or you will regret it." She slammed the phone down, disconnecting the call. I tossed my phone onto the couch and walked directly to my bedroom closet. I reached past my daily work clothes and carefully pulled out a heavy protective garment bag. I unzipped it slowly. Inside hung a beautifully tailored classic dress. It was modest, elegant, and timeless. It did not have flashy diamonds or a designer label. It was my mother's dress. It was the exact outfit she wore on her final birthday, just weeks before the tragic accident that took her and my father away from me. I had kept it preserved for over a decade. To the outside world, it might look slightly vintage or plain, but to me, it was a priceless treasure. Wearing it was my way of ensuring my mother could be there with me on one of the most important days of my life. No amount of money, and certainly no screaming demands from Rita, could force me to replace this profound emotional connection with a piece of flashy fabric. I hung the dress on the back of my door, feeling completely secure in my decision. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Sullivan. "Did you seriously start a fight with my mother over a piece of clothing?" Sullivan demanded. He sounded furious. It was the very first time he had ever raised his voice at me in such an aggressive manner. "I did not start a fight," I explained, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Your mother sent me a dress that I am not comfortable wearing. I told her I already have my own dress for the party. Why do you have to make everything so incredibly difficult? Sullivan yelled into the phone, completely ignoring my side of the story. My mother spent a lot of money on that outfit to make you look presentable. Will it kill you to just wear the dress she picked? Stop being so stubborn and just do what she says. My chest tightened. Sullivan, the dress I am wearing belonged to my late mother. It is the last thing she wore before she died. I want her memory with me. Nobody cares about some old vintage clothes. He groaned in intense frustration, completely dismissing my trauma. You are embarrassing my mother. Wear the dress she bought or do not bother showing up to the party. A heavy, suffocating silence fell between us. The man on the other end of the line was a complete stranger. He cared more about his mother's fragile ego than the memory of my dead parents. I did not argue. I did not yell back. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end button. I walked back into the bedroom, looked at my mother's dress hanging on the door, and made a silent vow to protect it at all costs. That evening, the crystal chandeliers of the hotel ballroom blazed brightly as I stepped through the doors. I kept my head held high, wearing my mother's vintage dress. It carried the faint, comforting scent of lavender, giving me the strength I needed to face the Vance family. But the moment my heels clicked against the polished marble flooring, the ambient chatter inside the massive room abruptly died. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. The wealthy elite of Sacramento, dressed in their flashy designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, began to whisper. A harsh, judgmental murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests blatantly pulled out their smartphones, pointing their cameras directly at me, their faces twisted in amusement. I heard scattered mocking laughter, cruel gasps, and the distinct sound of camera shutters clicking in rapid succession. They were recording my entrance as if I were some kind of pathetic circus spectacle. Before I could even process the hostile environment, Rita aggressively pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Her face was twisted in absolute rage, completely abandoning her usual high society grace. She did not care about keeping her voice down or maintaining a polite facade. She wanted an audience. What is the meaning of this? Rita screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceilings. I explicitly told you what to wear tonight. We're a wealthy family, and you showed up to your own engagement party in a cheap dress. I stood my ground, clutching my small purse, refusing to let her intimidate me. Rita, this is my mother's dress. It means everything to me. I am not changing. It belongs in a dumpster. Rita spat, gesturing wildly to the crowd of recording guests. Look at you. You look like a homeless beggar who wandered into the wrong building. You are intentionally trying to make a fool out of us in front of our most important business partners. I spent thousands of dollars to make you look presentable, and you show up in this disgusting, outdated rag just to defy me. The whispers around us grew louder, feeding Rita's toxic ego. Then Sabrina stepped forward from the shadows, holding a glass of champagne. Her eyes gleamed with pure malice. She's trying to humiliate our family, Sabrina yelled, making sure every single guest in the back of the room heard her clearly. She wants everyone to think we do not take care of her. She is just a pathetic gold digger throwing a tantrum. Sabrina closed the distance between us in 2 quick, aggressive strides. She did not just yell, she physically lunged at me. She reached out and violently grabbed the fabric of my right shoulder. Take it off, Sabrina hissed, pulling the fabric with all her strength. Stop, I gasped, trying to pull away from her grip. But Sabrina yanked harder. A sickening ripping sound echoed sharply through the silent ballroom. The delicate lace on my right shoulder, the exact piece of lace my mother had carefully hand-sewed just days before she died, tore completely open. The fabric gave way entirely, leaving my bare shoulder exposed to the cold air and the precious heirloom permanently ruined beyond repair. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Flashbulbs went off blindly as people recorded the assault. The sheer brutality of the unprovoked act left me momentarily paralyzed in shock. I frantically clamped my hand over my torn shoulder, desperately trying to hold the shredded pieces of my mother's memory together. My chest heaved. Hot tears of absolute humiliation and devastation threatened to spill, but I bit the inside of my cheek and refused to let them fall. I turned my head, desperately searching the crowd for the man who had promised to protect me. I found Sullivan standing just a few feet away. He saw everything. He heard his mother scream at me. He watched his sister violently tear my clothes. This was the defining moment. This was the exact second a real man would step in, shield his fiancée, and demand respect. Instead, Sullivan looked at my torn dress, then looked at his raging mother. He swallowed hard, his face turning completely pale. When my pleading eyes locked onto his, he panicked. He immediately averted his gaze, staring intensely at the floor. Then he took a very deliberate, cowardly step backward, melting into the shadows of the crowd. He completely abandoned me to the wolves without saying a single word. He chose his mother's toxic approval over my basic human dignity. In that agonizing moment, every single illusion I had about him shattered completely. He was not a kind, gentle man. He was a spineless coward. The crowd closed in tighter. Rita opened her mouth to deliver another vicious insult, clearly intending to finish breaking my spirit right then and there. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the room. The massive, solid oak doors of the ballroom burst open with terrifying force. The heavy, rhythmic thud of leather shoes striking the polished marble floor immediately froze every single eye in the ballroom. The oppressive silence was instant. My grandfather Harold walked through the grand archway. Two massive bodyguards in immaculate dark suits flanked him, scanning the room with cold precision. The sheer authority radiating from him forced the murmuring crowd to part like the Red Sea. The guests, who had been recording my humiliation, quickly lowered their phones, instinctively sensing the dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Harold did not announce his presence. He did not address the whispering elite. His piercing gaze locked directly onto me. He saw my torn dress. He saw the exposed shoulder where my mother's handmade lace used to be. His jaw tightened into a rigid line. He walked straight past Rita and Sabrina, completely ignoring their existence. When he reached me, he stopped. Without a single word, he unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket. He took it off and gently draped it over my shoulders, carefully covering the ruined fabric. The heavy material instantly shielded me from the glaring eyes of the crowd. His warm, steady hand squeezed my arm, silently promising that the nightmare was over. Then Harold slowly turned to face the Vance family. His eyes were dark and lethal. "Who dared to do this?" he roared. The booming sound of his voice shook the crystal glasses on the nearby tables. Rita blinked, her face contorting in pure confusion. Sabrina took a nervous step back, the arrogant smirk wiped completely off her face. They clearly had no idea who this imposing man was. Rita, desperately trying to salvage her shattered authority in front of her high society friends, puffed out her chest. "Excuse me," Rita snapped, though her voice wavered. "Security should have stopped you at the door. This is a private engagement party for the Vance family. Who do you think you are, barging in here and shouting at us?" Harold let out a low, menacing laugh. The sound sent chills down my spine. He looked around the extravagant ballroom, tracing the gold leaf ceilings and the massive chandeliers, before bringing his deadly gaze back to Rita. "Your private party." Harold repeated, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are standing inside my building. You are drinking my champagne. You are occupying a property that belongs entirely to my corporation. And you just laid your filthy hands on my granddaughter." The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. Rita's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Sabrina's hands began to shake violently. Harold stepped forward, closing the distance between him and Rita. He projected his voice so every single person in the massive hall could hear the undeniable truth. "My name is Harold," he declared with absolute power. "I am the founder and chairman of the luxury hospitality empire that owns this exact hotel, along with 50 others across the country. You looked at my granddaughter and saw a target. You saw a young woman living a humble life, working an honest job, and you decided she was beneath you. You thought you could bully her, control her, and strip away her dignity without facing any consequences. Harold pointed a strict finger at Rita. She chose to live simply to learn the true value of hard work. She wanted to know the real character of the people around her without the influence of money. And tonight, you showed her exactly who you are. You revealed your ugly, greedy, and arrogant true colors. A collective, echoing gasp swept through the hundreds of guests. The realization hit the room like a devastating shockwave. The poor hotel receptionist they had been ruthlessly laughing at just moments ago was actually the future owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire. The transformation of the Vance family was spectacular to witness. Rita stumbled backward, her knees visibly buckling under her weight. She desperately grabbed the edge of a catering table to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly. Sabrina was trembling so hard that she dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, but nobody moved. She stared at her own hands in sheer, unadulterated horror, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her actions. She had just physically assaulted a billionaire heiress in the middle of her own hotel. Sullivan, who had cowardly retreated into the shadows when I needed him the most, suddenly pushed his way to the front. His eyes were wide with panic. The reality that he had just allowed his mother and sister to publicly destroy his relationship with a billionaire heiress was visibly tearing him apart. He opened his mouth, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of apology, but Harold silenced him with a single sharp glare. The absolute terror radiating from the Vance family was deafening. The suffocating atmosphere was so heavy that Sabrina's trembling gasps echoed clearly across the silent ballroom. Harold did not waste another second on their shock. He turned slightly, raising a single hand. The hotel's general manager, who had been standing nervously near the entrance, immediately rushed forward, holding a digital tablet. "Mr. Chairman," the manager said, bowing respectfully. "Revoke the Vance family's VIP membership cards immediately," Harold commanded, his voice cold and purely transactional. "They are permanently banned from this property and all affiliated locations. Contact the legal department first thing Monday morning. I want a full review of all vendor contracts. Find the termination clauses for Sabrina Vance's media company and sever all business ties. We do not renew contracts with violent liabilities." Sabrina let out a loud, pathetic wail. Her company was already drowning in massive debt. Losing a corporate client like our empire would guarantee her immediate and highly public bankruptcy. "Furthermore," Harold added, looking directly at Rita, "cancel all corporate discounts applied to tonight's event. Bill them for 100% of the venue and catering costs. If they fail to pay the invoice by tomorrow afternoon, send it straight to collections." Harold then stepped closer to Sabrina, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. "And consider yourself incredibly lucky I do not call the police right now. Ripping a woman's clothes off her body constitutes battery and willful destruction of property. If you ever come near my granddaughter again, my lawyers will bury you so deep in civil lawsuits you will never recover." The sheer weight of the consequences crushed the Vance women. Rita, the woman who had demanded I scrub floors and quit my job, literally dropped to her knees. She grabbed the edge of my grandfather's tailored trousers, weeping openly. "Please, sir, we made a terrible mistake, Heidi. Please forgive us. We didn't know who you were." "That is exactly the problem, Rita," I said, looking down at her tear-stained face. "You only respect people when you know their bank account balance." Sullivan finally broke through the crowd. His face was entirely flushed with panic and desperate regret. He reached his hand out toward me, his fingers trembling wildly. "Heidi, please," Sullivan stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I am so sorry. I didn't know they would go this far. Just give me a chance. Let me explain everything. We can fix this. I love you." I looked at the man I had almost married. I did not feel angry anymore, just an overwhelming sense of clarity. With one swift motion, I slid the modest engagement ring off my finger. I stepped forward and pressed the cold metal directly into his trembling palm. "There is absolutely nothing to explain, Sullivan," I said firmly, ensuring every single word cut deep. "When your mother handed me an unfair contract to ruin my career, you told me to just sign it. When she insulted my late mother's memory, you yelled at me to obey her. And when your sister physically attacked me in front of hundreds of people, you took a step back and hid." Sullivan swallowed hard, thick tears welling in his eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came out. "What I need is a man who dares to stand beside me during the storm," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "I do not need a coward who only finds his courage when he realizes who my grandfather is. We are completely done." I turned my back on Sullivan forever. I slipped my arm through my grandfather's arm. Together, we walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the Vance family to face their financial ruin and public disgrace alone. The heavy oak doors closed behind us, shutting out their pathetic apologies for good. Life always tests the people around you. Never judge someone by their job title or bank account. Character is revealed by how people treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. Always cherish the ones who stand fiercely by your side during a storm, because they are the only ones who deserve to be there when the sun shines. Thank you all for listening to my story until the end. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have pressed charges against the sister? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.